Hey YouTube, you already know what it is. I'm back again with another live video. And in today's live video, so what do I even name this video? I just typed everything so fast, I don't forget what I even named it. That fast. No, I just, alright. I'll have to edit it. Oops. I had to edit it. What was the last one called? Alright. Alright, so anyway, I'm back with the Rest in Power. The Enduring Life of Trayvon Martin by Sabrina Fulton and Tracy Martin, which are his parents. And I'm trying my best to get through this book, but like I said, a lot of these chapters are long, and I'm close to the end. So I'm trying. I'm trying. So before I get started, what I was saying in the last video, if anybody decide to watch that video or watch any of my videos reading this book, which is listed as my live stream videos. When it comes to the whole detective situation, that's the closest I ever been to when it comes to like some law stuff and people being in trouble and shit like that. And the crazy thing about it is, like I said in the last live video, I've never been in a situation as crazy as this Trayvon Martin situation. But the situation I've been in was pretty much being around my cousin and her baby father. And y'all already know, like all my loyal subscribers and people that really watch my videos, y'all already know this situation. And it pop up in my head because I'll be thinking about a lot that happened in the past, and that's one of the situations that happened in the past. So when it came time to when it came time for me to speak to a detective, like I said, I found out from my cousin who was reaching out to me for whatever reason. And I didn't want to believe it because I felt like I had a lot of different thoughts in my head. I thought somebody was trying to set me up. I didn't know if it was her trying to set me up, if it was like it was just a lie. And um it was to the point where, like I said, I was asked to watch the children after my cousin and her baby father slipped because I've been helping my cousin watch her kids since 2015 when I started hanging out with my cousin and her baby father the baby father who I was cool with at the time. But as y'all know, shit happened, and it got to a point where I stopped talking to my cousin for one situation, and that's her baby father, so he pretty much gonna have her side. And me and him had our arguments and whatever. So it was just a whole bunch of balled up shit that had me stop talking to them. It was to the point where it got so crazy that they blocked me, I blocked them, and that was it. Um, but when that situation happened, like I said in the previous video, it was kind of weird because the mother of my cousin's boyfriend, from my understanding, the detective said he's not in a rush because he's busy at the time, and she was so eager to get me to talk to the detective, and I'm like, first of all, I ain't got shit to do with it. I don't know why anybody want to talk to me. They already know the truth that I ain't got nothing to do with it ever since the fucking night everything fucking occurred. And they wanted to know each and every person that was in the house. I went outside, I talked, but before then, I guess nobody knew that I was related to my cousin. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. I don't know. But now that I think about it, because back then my mind was all over the place. Now that I think about it, I should have known something was up because it seemed like when I was out there helping them, we had run into people, just random people, who probably was asking them about this and asking them about that. And I remember they like, oh, he hate his cousin, he don't like his cousin, and I just ignored it because at the end of the motherfucking day, I was mad at her for a situation that occurred that had nothing to do with whatever the fuck they had going on. Me and my cousin's situation occurred because she owed me money that she promised that she would give me back after we went. I mean, she had a little vacation where she was off from work and she was saying that she was gonna take the kids to the beach. I didn't have money at that time, and I was like, "Damn! I mean, I would love to go with y'all, but damn, I ain't never got no money. I ain't get my money until the next week when she had to go back to work." So fast forward, when I did get my money, she was like, "Oh, Damien, you got a couple dollars to get me this, and I'll pay you back, or you got a couple dollars to get me that to pay you back." I'm like, "Well, I'll give her a couple dollars because at the end of the day, she was driving me around everywhere, places I needed to go and shit like that." And I thought she would really pay me back because we never had a situation like that before. But this is how fucked up people are. They get mad at you and they'll find ways not to pay you back. I'm watching your kids. And this is and me telling this story is not to bring up any past drama. I'm just telling it like it is. Because and I'm gonna go to why I feel like it'd be a lot of weird shit going on in this world, bro. Especially when it comes to having to talk to a detective and shit like that. So, first it was a money situation, and I believed her. Then it got to a point where she is trying to make it seem like I was a bad babysitter. I was mistreating her kids wrong. They was always on time. I'll talk about some shit. The kids ain't want me around. They and shit like that. Because she don't like the fact that if her kids are bad, they get punished. They have to get in the corner. They get toys taken away. They will have to go and take a nap. And yeah, I'm a yell. And most of it is not because of the kid. I mean, it's not at the kids. I'm young because like, why do I even have to say anything when the father is right there in the house? He don't work. all he do is play video. He fall asleep all night because he up with you, and he play video games. And I gotta do everything. I'm making bottles, making sure the kids eat, changing clothes, wiping asses, all types of shit. And you're right there, pretty much not doing nothing. Just let me do everything until you see me in anger. Then you want to step up and be daddy of the year. I'm doing this out of kind of my heart. I don't have to, but at the end of the day, I'm like, I enjoy y'all. I enjoy being out here with y'all. I have fun from time to time, so I don't mind helping out if somebody need help. But I'm not about to be sitting here doing shit out of kindness of my heart, and y'all doing the most. Fast forward from that, so now she over here trying to use any excuse she can not to pay me. We get into an argument because her baby father and his little brother did try to do. I guess they're trying to pull a prank or they're doing shit to make me mad. So they told her that I was yelling at the kids and I didn't pop the kids, which was untrue. Yeah, I was yelling at him because he wasn't helping. I'm like, I still gotta take care of your youngest daughter at the time. I'm over there with her. At the end of the day, the plan was I watch the baby upstairs in your mom room. You watch the older kids, and every now and then I come downstairs to check on everybody, make sure everything the hell good. Or if you want to spend time with your daughter, I'll come downstairs. But if she sleep, I'ma try to come downstairs, eat myself, or if the kids need help with making bowls of cereal, whatever, I'll come downstairs, try to hurry up and help, and then rush back upstairs. Maybe I gotta make a bowl or whatever. So, like always, my cousin's at work, and the mother-in-law at the time was at work. Her baby father, his little brother, could be a pain in the ass. They like to do pranks. They like to do this. They like to do that. And sometimes I had to let them know to leave me the hell alone. And then he's the father. He just let the kids do everything, already knowing that I'm supposed to help you. Help babysit. I'm be mad because you sitting there letting the kids scream, yell, throw toys, do this, do that, and then when I say something, you making it seem like I'm damn mother dearest. So all of that balled up. I'm like, at the end of the day, you act like you don't want me helping you watch your kids. You over here trying to make it seem like that I'm mistreating the kids. You pissing they motherfucking head. So I'm gonna just keep my ass on. We always had arguments about something, and then we end up being cool later on. So after a while, everything calmed down. I ignored what happened. I mean, the little disagreement that we had when she returned home, trying to make it seem like it was something that it wasn't. Yeah, and when you return home, you made an ass out of yourself. Your kids was fine. Nobody was crying. Nobody was yelling. I'm upstairs doing my job, helping watch your kids, making sure your youngest daughter at the time was being good. Was good, while the father was downstairs with the older kids. So, still, like, it was just a lie. So, fast forward. It was just a lot. To be honest, to make a long story short, it was just a lot where money was involved. She didn't want to pay, so she was making excuses not to pay me. So I'm like, I don't care because I already knew you wasn't going to pay me in the first place. One minute she talked about some she got to pay a ticket that the baby father got, and she wanted to take the kids out again. It was always an excuse. So I said, you know what, I'm over it. I already know you ain't shit. You ain't going to pay me. So can y'all please just bring my clothes? Because it got to the point where it was an argument that happened that not really with me. Although I'm pretty sure she was mad at me, but it wasn't like the argument wasn't fully at me. She was too busy arguing with her baby father and arguing with the mother-in-law. And I didn't agree with her. because I felt like she was trying to find a way to argue with me too because of an earlier situation. Because she came in the house stomping, not speaking to everybody, complaining about whatever, and everybody cool. We all having fun. I'm sitting down, was trying to get a tattoo that never happened. Fast forward, we stopped talking. I went home. And like I said, fast forward a whole lot that happened. It got to the point where, for whatever reason, she ended up reaching out to me. And that's how I found out. Because I don't know if anybody else is going to tell me. I go back to Delaware, and it was kind of weird because it's like, I know I ain't do nothing wrong. Why do I have to talk? But then again, in the way they found out, okay, why is he with? It was pretty much why is he over there with the baby father in that family, and this is your family. You're not the only thing. I mean, you're not blood related to these people. The only thing is, okay, your cousin, who you are blood related to, that's the baby father. They separated, but you're over here. The truth is, at the end of the day, number one, I wanted to get out the fucking house. I was at a point in my life where I just wasn't happy being in North Philly. There was a lot going on. So whatever opportunity I got to get out the house, I took it. Just a lot of personal shit going on. And number two, like I mentioned prior, if anybody watched the videos where I spoke on this story, no matter what happened between me, my cousin, and the baby father, it never got to the point where shit got super crazy. At the end of the day, we family, we friends, whatever. We didn't had several arguments. It never got to a point where anybody was fighting. We'd just have arguments. People would probably assume that a fight was going to happen because of how crazy arguments would get. But we'd separate each other. I ain't talking to you. I ain't talking to you. Fuck you. Fuck you. I'm going home. Dad tried to make it seem like that I was the problematic person. We'd stop talking for a while, and then somewhere down the line, we'd start talking again. But with this, me and my cousin haven't talked at all. She reached out to me after a while, but it was just so much going on. I know who to believe, what to believe. All I know is I'm looking at it like this. At the end of the day, I'm helping watch your kids, making sure they safe. I ain't go that far telling her why I was in Delaware because from all I knew is I don't know what the fuck was going on. They had their relationship problems. They've been having relationship problems, but that's none of my business. Me and the mother-in-law had a cool bond. She respected me. I respected her as much as I could, despite the arguments with her son and my cousin, and her trying to protect her son throughout the arguments and disagreements. Um, but at the end of the day, she helped me out when I was in need. Like if she would drop me off home and I ain't had no money and there was no food in the house at the time because my sister was working, my niece was at school with my mom. She gave me a couple dollars, or she'll take me out with her and or whatever if she is going out to eat or whatever. So no matter what was going on, I didn't think I was in any danger. I just looked at it like it was just going to help watch the kids. But at the end of the day, I had to rebuild the bond, or pretty much a half-ass friendship with the baby father, because that's where he live at, and I'm gonna be around him. So, but silly me, not thinking that okay, they gonna use you. Up until I got to Delaware, but it was already too late. I'm already in Delaware. I'm already around them. But no matter what, I'm like, I ain't got shit to do with it. I'm just here to help y'all watch your kids, help whatever y'all need help with. I'll stay down here for a couple days, help y'all with the kids, but I still got shit to do in Philly. And I'll come back whenever I'm free. I'm not about to be down here. I'm not about to make it seem like that I'm kumbaya with everybody and I didn't forgive everybody. Because to be honest, I still was pissed off, but I was only doing it because, and like I said, I wanted to get out the house because I was going through my own personal shit. But I never ever thought shit would get as real as it did until it's too late. But yeah, I had to, but it was a lot that happened. I ended up having to talk to the detective. And from that point on, I just knew that I couldn't trust no fucking body. So after that, I watched the kids as much as I could, but it just got to the point where I got to worry about myself. Why am I even down here? Y'all doing the most. It's a lot going on. I'm starting to see a lot of shit happening where y'all trying to put me in shit that I ain't got shit to do with. I'm taking my ass home and I'm not talking to nobody. And what made matters worse is the last day I was in Delaware, me and the baby father got into an argument because he wanted to play around too fucking much. And we almost got into a fight, and his mom took me home, and I never seen them again. And that pretty much, I mean, yeah, people try to he tried to reach out to me on Instagram several times and Facebook several times, but like I said, it's been years. I haven't talked to nobody. And still to the day, when it comes to the Delaware crowd, I haven't talked to them in years. I haven't seen nobody, talk to nobody, shit. As for my cousin, that's family. So of course I'm always like I might not always talk to her or see her because she live wherever she live at. But the last time I even talked to her was after finding out that one of my little cousins passed away, and I pretty much just shared my condolences as much as I could. But that was it. We never had no full conversation. It was I'm sorry for the loss. I shared memories of the first and second time I done met my little cousin in person when I was living at aunt who I lost house, and they then came over. But that pretty much was that. I really don't haven't talked to nobody, and it's sad to say, but still to the day, I just stay in my own lane since everything that happened. And it's sad because that was the first and only time I ever been in a situation where it got to a point where I got caught up. Well, somebody tried to catch me up in something, and I had to talk to the detective. But after that, I like I said, I kept my distance. I'm like, I can't trust no fucking body. All the good shit I hope people do, and when I was there for people, people and gave me their ass to kiss multiple times. And I just said, never again. Enough is enough. But let me get through this story because none of that got anything to do with the story. I just just certain parts remind me of shit. Let me get back to this book because I'm over here telling y'all my life story. Anywho, correct. I said D-Line Ronda moved on to the next day, Tuesday. Listen to various 911 calls and their contents. Oh no, I already read that. So where the hell did I leave off at? Okay, now I remember. All right, so on the day of July 9th, the defense called another expert witness, Dr. Vincent D. Mayo, a nationally renowned forensic pathologist and medical examiner from San Antonio, Texas, with more than 40 years of experience. The doctor took his seat in the witness stand in a suit and yellow tie. As Dr. Mayo testified, photographs from the autopsy, including a close-up of the bullet's entry wound and Trayvon chest, were projected on the far wall of the courtroom. I looked over at Sabrina, knowing this wouldn't be easy for her. I could feel the effort she was making to keep herself composed, but she never looked at the photograph. No, I bet she did. I mean, I guess the father was more tough. Hmm. Because they kept saying she walked out the courtroom multiple times. I don't know. Anywho, the defense was arguing that based on the bullet wound, Trayvon must have been on top of Zimmerman at the time of his death. We didn't doubt that there had been a struggle, a fight, somebody on top of us and somebody on bottom, but maybe Trayvon and Zimmerman both at one point had the dominant position. We didn't doubt that Trayvon was fighting for his life. Whatever the conflict was, it began. The moment the neighborhood watch kept inside to foul Trayvon. Me personally, I don't live in Florida, never been to Florida, so I don't know about this thing, your grandma, whatever may have happened. But just by reading this book, I feel like a lot of shit that Zimmerman was saying was lies. I feel like at the end of the motherfucking day, it got to the point where um this is what I feel like. I feel like it got to a point where he was following Trayvon for a while. Trayvon on the phone. He called up to Trayvon. They had a few words with each other. And it got to a point where Trayvon was scared. So I feel like Zimmerman was walking up on Trayvon and Trayvon socked him in his fucking face. I feel like a little scuffle did happen, but Zimmerman had more weight, and in the mix of a scuffle, Zimmerman shot Trayvon. They said there was no blood under. There was none of the Zimmerman DNA on Trayvon, no blood or skin or nothing under his fingernails or anything like that. So it might have been a few. It might have been a few punches, but it wasn't as much as Zimmerman trying to put it. And that fight didn't last long to the point where Trayvon was bashing his teeth in the concrete or nothing like that. But whatever kind of scuffle that did happen, I feel like, me personally, I feel like a little scuffle did happen. Zimmerman felt like he was going to lose, and he shot Trayvon in close range. I also, in a way, feel like that majority of his injuries were self-inflicted. And just like Karen Bryant tried to cover her ass when she felt like the court was catching her in the lie, I feel like Zimmerman exaggerated a lot of the motherfucking story because he felt like the court was going to catch him in the lie. That's why, just like Carolyn Bryant and all the rest of the people that did what they did to Emmett Till, when Sabrina Fulton and Tracy Martin, no, yeah, Sabrina Fulton and Tracy Martin will look over, he had a blank stare because he felt like that his lie was going to be believed no matter what anybody said. His lie was going to be believed, and what we see, he ended up winning in the end. But anywho, Dr. Jamel went on to describe Trayvon's wound in detail. The bullet entered his chest an inch to the left of center between the fifth and sixth ribs. It passed through the right ventricle of his heart and became large in his right lung. In his description, Dr. DeMaio kept referencing the photo of the wound, which had been up on the wall now for several agonizing minutes. I stared at the photo for what seemed to be hours while Sabrina diverted her eyes and looked down. The defense lawyer moved away from the wound itself and onto the effects the wound would have had on Trayvon as he breathed his last word. He breathed his last breath. How long was he alive? How long was he conscious? And what would he have been physically able to do after being shot? The ability to move, Dr. DeMaio said, describing the last minutes of my son's life in the cold and analytical manner, is determined by the amount of oxygen in your brain, for which you had a reserve of 10 to 15 seconds. That's minimum. The amount of blood in the brain depends on blood pressure and how severe your wounds are, he said. A moment later, he added, now how long can your heart beat? In this case, he continued, you have a through and through hole in the right ventricle of the heart, and then you have at least one hole, or if not two, into the right lung. So you're losing blood, and every time your heart contracts, it pumps blood out of the two holes in the ventricle and at least one hole in the lung. He said in Trayvon's case, his heart would have been pumping faster than usual, more than 100 times per minute, due to the physical nature of the struggle and the fact that he had been shot. Each pump pushing blood out of the holes in the heart and the lung. After 2 minutes, Trayvon would have lost half of his blood supply. The blood he had left would not have been able to reach his brain, making death imminent. So, assuming these conditions, Dr. DeMaio said he's going to be dead within 1 to 3 minutes after being shot. In terms of being conscious, the doctor said Trayvon would have been aware or for less time as oxygen levels in the brain drop. No parent wants their child to suffer even a few seconds is far too much. My eyes were red with tears. I could feel Sabrina's legs shaking, and she rose and exited the courtroom. From what I understand you to say then, West continued, for at least 10 to 15 seconds after Mr. Martin sustained the shot, he would have been capable of talking and voluntary movement. He could, Dr. DeMaio said, some people just lose consciousness immediately. It's psychological. is not physical, but he has the potential for 10 to 15 seconds minimum. Could that include moving his arms from the outreach position to underneath his body during the 10 to 15 seconds? Yes, the male said. But once consciousness is lost, there is no more voluntary movement and gratefully no more pain. On July 10th, Dennis Root, a use of force expert witness, was called by the defense. A retired 22-year veteran Florida policeman, he was certified as an instructor in hand-to-hand combat, defense tactics, and impact weapons. He taught classes in open-hand combat techniques like blocking chokeholds and takedowns and the use of pepper spray. Late in his career, he had become an instructor in firearms licensed by the state as well as the NRA and focused much on his teaching on justifiable uses of force in various situations. Okay. Root filed the case as it dominated the media, and he soon began with the defense, reviewing evidence, including 911 calls, witness statements, police and medical reports, and crime scene photos. O'Mara led Root through the series of questions about Root's background, his interpretation of the events of the night of February 26, 2012, and if it would have been appropriate to use force and even a gun in a self-defense situation. All right, when is this chapter over? Because I'm done. Anywho, listen, as the more pages I turn, the longer it get. Then John, I'm sorry, y'all, but like I said, I'm trying to get done with this book because a lot of this shit that I'm reading is making me upset. But at the end of the day, I start, so whatever I start, I must finish. In respect to the family and anybody that finds interest in listening to me read this book. Then John Guy began his cross-examination. The defendant told you that his head was repeatedly slammed into concrete. The prosecutor eventually asked. His words were, his head was slammed into the concrete. Root said, you didn't ask him how many times. No, not how many times it happened. And you didn't ask him how his head was slammed, right? Where Trayvon grabs his ears or grabs his face or grabs his jacket. No, I didn't ask him specifically how his head was being impacted into the concrete. He said, I again generalized statements from Mr. Zimmerman himself. But this perception was that the downward blows his head hitting the concrete, his head was being slammed into the concrete. I think you should, you said you reviewed some medical records. Guy said, did you review the medical record where the woman measured the longest laceration on the back of his head was 2 centimeters? They weren't that large, if that's what you're asking. Ruth said, Guy pointed out the 2 centimeters and less than an inch, and the other cut on the killer's head was less than 1 centimeter, which a medical examiner from Jacksonville had previously testified was insufficient and not life-threatening. Now that I'm reading this, I feel like at the end of the day, they probably was both on the goddamn ground. And however he was laying, the ground could have did it. Not meaning that, okay, Trayvon was slamming his head to the ground or whatever the case may be. But with them probably tussling and rolling around each other, however the fight may have happened before Trayvon was shot, it was either his skin just rubbing against the ground because of how thin his hair may have been, whether it was short at the time or whatever the case may be, But I personally don't think that Trayvon bashed his head in the ground. I like they said, there was no DNA on Trayvon Martin, no blood under his fingernails, so somebody lying. Would you agree with me that of all the people you heard from, either talked to or had written statements or audio statements, the person with the best vantage point would have been the defendant, right? Guy asked. Of course, Ruth said. The defendant told you in his statement that Trayvon Martin was straddling him. Guy said. And you understood from the context of your conversation that Trayvon Martin was over the defendant's belly button, right? Over his waist area, Ruth said. What Guy did next surprised us. He brought out a life-size foam dummy and landed it face up on the floor in front of the witness stand. The lawyer at the defense table must have been surprised too. They all stood with curious looks to try to get a better view. Where is he going with this? I thought. So as the defendant described it to you, Guy said as he got down on his knees with the dummy between his legs, his hips above the dummy's abdomen. Is this the way he described it in the area of his belly button? What's really important right now, Sir Ruth said. Number one, you got your knees up pretty high on his waist. If you want to slide down just a little bit more, guys shuffle back and forth in order to move back in the direction of the dummy's feet. There you go, Ruth said, confirming that the prosecutor was now in the right position. By the way, God said, did you have the defendant do this? He did not. I mean, he had not. If this person, this mannequin, God continued to work carrying a firearm on their waist, where would the gun be right now in relation to me? It would be at your left inner thigh, Ruth said. Guy pointed to his thigh to illustrate to the jury the location Ruth was describing and added, underneath my leg, right? Ruth agreed on the occasion that the defendant was right-handed. Were you aware, God continued, that the defendant described to his best friend that when he slid down, the defendant slid down, that Trayvon Martin was up around his armpits, and he moved his knees up directly underneath the dummy's shoulder to illustrate his point? No, Ruth said. I not heard that. Where would the gun be now? Now the gun would be behind your left leg. Ruth said that the killer was slipping down between Trayvon's legs. During the altercation, and that was what the killer claimed exposed the gun to Trayvon's view. Guy asked if Ruth had asked the killer how he reached for the gun. He said he hadn't, but what was more important than how he reached for the gun was the location on his head where the gun was holstered. During the walkthrough video, the killer indicated that the gun was in his waistband behind him. So how could Trayvon see the gun if it was behind his back under his jacket if Trayvon was on top of him? Daylight Rounder would eventually mention the location of the killer's gun in passing during the closing arguments. It wasn't right here in the front. It was toward the back, and it was hidden. And John Guy would say in his closing arguments, if Trayvon Martin had been mounted on the defendant, as the defendant claims, when he went to get his gun, he never could have got it. I don't have to pull out the mannequin again and sit on it. You remember, if he was up on his waist, the waist is covered by Trayvon Martin's legs, he would have got the gun. It's a physical impossibility. But I didn't feel the jury realized the importance of this, which is that it would be almost literally impossible for Trayvon to have seen and reached for the gun. The killer's story seemed to to be not very well thought out. Seemed to be a not very well thought out fantasy, and it is transparent. Rihanna just had to hammer in on this simple fact for the jury, but he didn't. O'Mara asked to borrow Guy's doll and laid the dummy on the floor in the same position Guy had placed it earlier. From the standing position, he questioned Root about the killer's injuries and if they could also be consistent with slamming the back and sides of his client's head to the concrete while resisting an attack. Root said they could be. Oh my God. O'Mara then brought up the fact that the gun had been discharged against Trayvon's hoodie, but with the distance from his chest, to which Root suggested that the only way that could have happened was if Trayvon was leaning over his killer, and that if he had been trying to get away the weight of from the can of IC. Y'all don't know what. As I'm reading this book, later on, now that I guess this book was written in 2016. So they keep saying IC. What the? I'm trying to figure out what the hell was it? Because I'm hearing a lot of stories. One minute they saying it was IC, then they saying it was a fruit punch or something. Then later on they saying watermelon. Would have caused Trayvon hoodie to fall against his own chest. Not that it mattered what kind of juice he got, whether he drunk it or whoever drunk it, which we all know nobody drunk it. But anyway, I don't know. I just remember certain stuff, and then reading this book is like, the fuck? O'Mara went through different positions above the dummy, sliding up and down his chest at each position, pointing to where he claimed his client's gun was holstered, and asked if the gun would have been available each time Root said it was. How much thrashing or movement was happening in that dynamic event between these two men at that point? O'Mara asked. I would have to say a lot, Root said. How could this be true? From the time Trayvon's phone got disconnected until the time of his death was only a minute and a half, as O'Mara picked up the dummy and placed it back behind the prosecution table. And I wonder, was the dummy a dumb thing to introduce, and had it just backfire on the prosecution? The defense would call a total of 8 witnesses, everyone from the killer's trainer, who called him physically saw, to a neighbor at the retreat who testified about burglaries committed by a young black man. And the prosecution would call 38 witnesses. But what everyone remembered from those final days was Dennis Root and John Guy Dummy, who was the winner in the use of the dummy to demonstrate the fight between Zimmerman and Trayvon Martin, wrote Hal Bodecker in the Orlando Sentinel in a story titled Mount Your Dummy Day, not the state, most analysts said. Oh, God. The trial was taking its toll on all of us. Long hours, endless witnesses, and constant replaying of that terrifying tape and gruesome photographs of our son's last hours on Earth. We were all mentally and physically exhausted, as was the defense. We're not physically able to keep up this pace much longer, Don West complained to Judge Nelson at the end of a 13-hour day of testimony. We had full days every day, weekends, depositions at night. Judge Nelson didn't show sympathy and instead demanded to know if the defendant planned to testify on his own behalf. That's some bullshit. I object to the court inquiring Mr. Zeman as to his decision about whether or not to testify. Don sat down with your objection is overruled, said Judge Nelson. The killer would not testify. And why should he? His lawyers had done their work, challenging through. Though it was, and as far as the state was concerned, the prosecutors and police, well, it was already clear that he was getting better treatment than my son. And with that, on July 10th, the defendant's rest, and after 4 days, half the time taken by the prosecution. But I couldn't rest ever again. That night in the hotel room that had become my second home, I thought of a long and almost impossible road that had taken us to this point. We had come so far from not knowing how our son had died to knowing almost everything, from being alone in the struggle and being supported by many parts of our nation and maybe even the world. Now the trial was coming to a close. Once it was over, would Trayvon rest in peace and be forgotten? Could something larger come out of this trial? This death, this loss, something bigger than a verdict against a single individual could change, actually come, if we continue to honor our son, both in his life and in his death. If we continue saying his name, will his name continue to stand for something deeper than his death, something bigger than his unfinished life, something that could last longer than this trial, something that would turn his passing to power. Okay, I'm done with Tracy's chapter. Now the book ends with Sabrina's chapter. So, like I said, I'm at the last chapter of the book. It seems pretty long. I'm trying to decide if I want to read it or not, or if I want to wait. I want to get done with this book because, like I said, it's just a lot. Like, I already know how it's going to end, but just reading it and reading everything and knowing every detail in the words of the parents, it makes you mad. And after all of this, still there was no justice. And to this day, this man is able to live his life like nothing happened. To be honest, you don't hear much about George Zimmerman anymore. It's sad. I see posts from Sabrina Fulton because I follow her on Instagram and stuff. But I don't know what's going on. My bad, y'all. I'm over here looking at something real quick. I wish I had some damn money. I'm fucking hungry. Shit downstairs. Not a single fucking thing. What kind of group is this? Why the fuck they keep? All right, I'm gonna try to get through this last chapter. I mean, this last chapter. I'm trying my best. I'm trying my best to get through this last chapter. Like I said, this is the last chapter of the book. This is chapter 13, Sabrina Fulton. I said Sabrina, no, it says chapter 13, Sabrina, July 12, 2013. I closed my eyes and prayed in the courtroom as closing arguments began on the morning of Thursday, July 11, 2013. It had been 18 days since the trial began, and now it would come down to final arguments from both sides. The prosecution went first with Bernie De La Rianda delivering a 2-hour presentation. The teenager did. De La Rianda said as he stepped up to the podium to face the jury that early afternoon. He is dead through no fault of his own. He is dead because another man made assumptions. He is dead not just because the man made those assumptions, because he acted upon those assumptions, and unfortunately, because his assumptions were wrong, Trayvon Benjamin Martin no longer walks on this earth. Unfortunately, this is one of the last photos that will ever be taken of Trayvon Martin, he said, holding up the picture of Trayvon's body lying dead in the grass at Twin Lakes. That is true because of the actions of one individual, the man before you, the defendant. The man who, after shooting Trayvon Martin, claims to not have realized he was dead. He continued. What did he do? Did he render or attempt to render the same aid that the heroic officers from the Sanford Police Department did, who didn't wear the mask they normally would wear, but give mouth to mouth, perform CPR in an attempt to bring life back into that young boy? He referred to the neighbor, Jonathan Manolo, one of the first to arrive at the scene, who testified that the defendant told him he had shot our son in self-defense. Recall what he told. Recall what he told Mr. Manolo. Please call my wife. And then apparently Mr. Manolo was taking too long or something, and he said, "Just tell her I killed him." Just, just kind of matter of fact. Those actions, those actions speak volumes of what occurred that evening, Sunday evening. He profiled him as a criminal. He assumed certain things that Trayvon Martin was up to no good. That is what led to his death. Trayvon Martin, he was there legally. He hadn't broken in or sneaked in or trespassed. He followed him. He tracked him because in his mind, in the defendant's mind, this was a criminal. And he was tired of criminals committing crimes out there. Again, it's not a bad thing. It's good that sentences get involved. But he went over the line. He assumed things that weren't true. Instead of waiting for the police to come and do their job, he did not. Because he, the defendant, wanted to make sure that Trayvon Martin didn't get out of the neighborhood that night. He decided he was going to be what he wanted to be, a police officer. The prosecutor was building up to intentionally this question: who was more afraid in the moments before the confrontation? The 17-year-old minding his own business, or the grown man with a loaded gun? Once again, he talked about the tape where the killer says to the dispatcher, these assholes, they always get away," saying that this indicated the hatred, ill will, or spite needed to convict. Hold the defendant responsible for his actions, De La Rianda said. Hold him accountable for what he did. Because if the defendant hadn't assumed that Trayvon Martin would have watched the basketball game and George Zimmerman, I'm assuming, would have gone to Target or done whatever he does on Sunday evenings, and we wouldn't be here. I wish he would have went with somebody. I wish he wasn't out there by himself. I really do, because like they said, he went to the store with a cousin or somebody before. So and I wonder why he decided to go to the store by himself after he just went to the store. I don't know. I just wish he didn't. I wish he went with somebody. I around to ask George to think back to the defendant's claim that he saw Trayvon circling in his vehicle. Assuming that's true, he says Trayvon got something in his hands. Why does this defendant get out of the truck if he thinks that Trayvon Martin is a threat to him? Why? Why? Because he got a gun. He got the equalizer. He's going to take care of it. He's a wannabe cop. He's going to take care of it. He's got a gun. And he's not going to put up with it. And if the police are taking too long to respond, Trayvon's body speaks to you. Even in death, it proves to you that this defendant is lying about what happened. Like Rihanna said at one point. See, because what's important is the defendant, in an attempt to convince the police that he was really shooting this boy, in self-defense. He had to exaggerate what happened. He said that's why he had to at some point say, "Oh, he was threatening me." It was almost like the levels of fear escalated. He outlined the escalation that the killer claimed, from Trayvon hitting him and getting him on the ground to the struggle in which he got the upper hand, to Trayvon threatening to kill him and putting his hand over his mouth, suffocate him and pinching his nose. And then he went for the gun. See how he's exaggerating everything? He was more than a wannabe cop, said De La Rihanna. He studied the law and knew the bullet points in terms of what's required for self-defense. He reviewed the testimony from Rachel Gentle in her telephone call timeline and the witnesses who made 911 calls. He also reviewed the physical evidence, including Trayvon's hands, which in death were underneath him, clenching his chest, which raised the question why, as life was leaving him, would Trayvon somehow lift himself up and place his hands back under his chest. He showed the Caltech PF 9mm gun to the jury and asked, look at the gun, look at the size of this gun. How did the victim see that in the darkness? He played a video in which the killer then asked if Trayvon seemed afraid on the night of the encounter. On the television interview with Sean Hannity, suggested that maybe Trayvon wasn't actually running. It was like skipping, going away quickly, but he wasn't running out of fear. He said, which De La Rihanna demonstrated as ludicrous by skipping in a carefree manner across the courtroom. It was ridiculous. How often have you seen a teenage boy skip down the street? How many arms did Trayvon Martin need for punching, moving to the sidewalk, grabbing the head, smothering the mouth and nose, grabbing for a gun, all at the same time? He asked. In his 2-hour closing argument, De La Rihanna noted the inconsistencies. The killer's claim of being hit 25 times, in which physical evidence, the cuts on the back of his head and his supposedly broken nose, didn't prove. The absence of Trayvon DNA or fingerprint evidence on the gun. The killer's claim that he was scared of Trayvon while still getting out of his truck to follow him, all of which meant that his actions and the physical evidence didn't meet his self-defense claim. He closed with this. Some of the people you heard from were the parents of both the victim and the defendant. Unfortunately, the only photographs left of Trayvon Martin are those ME photographs. They can't take any more photos, and that's true because of the actions of one person. The man before you, the man who is guilty of second-degree murder. De La Rihanna's the dramatic closing reviewed the evidence clearly, strongly, and presented the jury with all the right questions. But we returned to our hotel that night with more questions and answers. The next day, the defense would present its closing arguments, led by Mark O'Mara. O'Mara also mentioned the defendant's desire to be a police officer, a wannabe cop, which he said, contrary to the prosecution's portrayal, was a good thing. The man wanted to help his community, a place ravaged by crime and suspicion. He spoke for around 3 hours. He put on a pair of sunglasses, loosened his tie, and put on a pinky ring to warn the jurors against making rash judgments against his client based on first impressions. Fuck out of here. And he said of the prosecution, they are supposed to use words like certainty, indefinite, and without question, behind a reasonable doubt. What aren't good words of good prosecutors are maybe, what if, I hope so, you figure it out. He exhibited a self-defense burden of proof chart. The state carries a burden without question of proving to you behind a reasonable doubt that George Zimmerman did not properly act in self-defense. He said, George Zimmerman is not guilty if you have just a reasonable doubt that he acted in self-defense. He talked about the shooter's injuries. No injuries are necessary to respond with deadly force. Not a cut on the finger. The statute is clear. a reasonable fear of bodily harm, so the injuries icing on the cake of self-defense. He had also introduced life-size cutouts to show the jury the heights of Trayvon and the shooter. Then he walked to the far side of the courtroom and picked up a jagged chunk of concrete more than 2 feet long and 4 inches thick. I've never seen a piece of concrete that thick, and the attorney appeared to struggle under its weight as he carried the rock across the courtroom and prepared to lay it on the floor in front of the jury. How many times was it said that Trayvon Martin was unarmed? The concrete chunk landed with a thud on the floor. That's cement, O'Mara said, then dramatically brushed his hands together and wiped them on his suit pants before he continued. That is a sidewalk, he said, and that is not an unarmed teenager with nothing but Skittles trying to get home. That is somebody who used the ability of dangerous items from his fist to the concrete to cause great bodily injury, and the suggestion by the state that that's not a weapon, that can hurt somebody, that can cause great bodily injury is disgusting. My mother wrote out this is my mother wrote out the word "this is so fake" on her notepad and passed it to me. I agree with my mom. He presented this horrible hunk of concrete as if Trayvon were walking around with it in his hands, threatening people. It was the sidewalk between the concrete and the cutouts and the rest. It was almost too much to believe, and we felt wasn't based on the facts. In closing, he said the state never ever lose their responsibility to take away reasonable doubt from you. Don't let them do it with innuendo, simply yelling. Don't let them do it with screeching, because none of that matters. Because we have a definition of reasonable doubt, and now you do. You look at that definition. You go back to that room and say, "Let's talk first about self-defense." If I think George may have acted in self-defense, we are done. I looked over at the jury. The 6 women were expressionless, but I could sense that the closing remarks had affected them. O'Mara thanked the jury for their time and attention. Before he rests the defense case, he had one more request for the jury. I want you to really, really look at those instructions, apply them, and just say he acted in self-defense. Find him not guilty. Let him go back and get back to his life, he said. Son of a bitch. Somebody needs to slap the shit out of O'Mara. The human heart, it was a many the human heart, it has a great many functions. Began John Guy after a short recess and emotional 1 hour rebuttal. It moves us, it motivates us, it inspires us, it leads us, and it guides us, our hearts, in big things like what we choose to do for a living, and in little things like what we do every day at any movement in the sky. So if we really want to know what happened out there beyond those homes on that dark rainy night, should we not look into the heart of the grown man and the heart of that child? Guy put up inside of the words the shooter used to describe Trayvon, and as if the words fucking punk were casual references to a perfect stranger, or did they reveal what was in the shooter's heart moments before he pursued and then killed Trayvon. What was in Trayvon Martin's heart? God asked the jury, was it not fair that Miss Gentile told you about? The witness who didn't want to be here, the witness who didn't want to be involved, but the witness, a human being that was on the phone with the real victim, in this case, Trayvon Martin, right up until the time of his death. God asked, wasn't that every child's worst nightmare to be followed on the way home in the dark by a stranger? Isn't that every child's worst fear? That was Trayvon Martin's last emotion. As a man speaks, so is he said in a reference to a Bible verse, which he called an old saying, but a good one. He showed the side with the last words Rachel heard Trayvon say, what are you following me for? If ever there was a window into a man's soul, God said it was the words from the defendant's mouth on that phone call. And if ever there was a question about who indicated the contact between the grown man and that child, it was again those defendant's words when he told Sean Love, the 911 operator, just had the officer call me on my cell phone, and I'll tell him where I am. George Zimmerman was not going back to the car or the mailboxes. And if there was ever any doubt about what happened, really happened, was it not completely removed by what the defendant said afterward, all of the lies he told, all of them. What does that tell you? There's only two people on this earth who know what really happened. God said the one of them can testify and the other one lied about the things that really truly matter, and not one lie over and over and over again. Why would he have to lie if he had done nothing wrong? If the defendant had done only what he was supposed to do, see and call, none of us would be here. Here we go. The defendant didn't shoot Trayvon Martin because he had to, God said. He shot him because he wanted to. And that's the bottom line. At various points in his closing, he showed slides and said he lied, read one, about Trayvon Martin covering his nose and mouth, about his head being slammed over and over. He changed, read another, about what Trayvon Martin said to him, about whether Trayvon Martin touched the gun. God challenged the notion proposed by the defense that there was no evidence the shooter followed Trayvon after the non-emergency line dispatcher asked him not to, and he responded with okay. The common sense that tells you if Trayvon Martin was the one on the hunt, would he still have been on his cell phone? He said, asked, would the earbuds still have been in his ears if he was getting ready to attack somebody? Really? Yes, he told the police, not just the police, his best friend. Remember his best friend in the world that Trayvon Martin was squeezing his nose? Guy said, do you really think that? Do you really think that if that was true, there wouldn't be George Zimmerman blood on these sticks that they pried under his Trayvon's fingernails? Let me suggest to you, in the end, this case is not about standing your ground. He said at one point, it's about staying in your car like he was taught to do, like he was supposed to do. The prosecutor reminded the jury of the requirements for the justifiable use of deadly force. A person is justified in using deadly force if he reasonably believes that such force is necessary to prevent imminent death or great bodily harm to himself. He showed photographs of the shooter's of the shooter's head with a few minor scrapes and a swollen nose. Ask yourself, who lost the fight? He said to the jury, repeating it twice. Who lost the fight? Who lost the fight? Let me address one more thing to you before I close. It was brought up to I'm about the defense in their summation this morning, and it was brought up by the defense in the trial. Race, he said, this case is not about race. It's about right and wrong. It's that simple. And let me suggest to you how you know that for sure. Ask yourselves, all things being equal, if the rules were reversed and that this 28-year-old George Zimmerman walking home in the rain with a hoodie on to protect himself from the rain, walking through the neighborhood, and a 17-year-old driving around in the car who called the police, who had hate in their heart, hate in their mouth, hate in their actions. And if it was Trayvon who had shot and killed George Zimmerman, what would your verdict be? That's how you know it's not about race. To the living, we owe respect, but to the dead, we owe the truth. He said, showing the jury the photograph of our son. What do we owe Trayvon Martin, 17 years old in 21 days, forever? He was a son. He was a brother. He was a friend. And the last thing he did on this earth was try to get home. This is the day, he said. The self-serving statements, the lies from his own mouth, he added, pointing to the defendant, and the hate in his heart, words that they can now take back. The physical evidence which refutes his lies, and the law that Her Honor is about to read to you, the law that applies to all of us. This is the truth. Thank you for your time. The case was now held in the hands of the jury, while I felt there were still so many unanswered questions. How could the trial end and Trayvon's side of the story never be told? Following the closing argument, Judge Deborah Nelson read the jury their instructions in the law that applied to the case. By now, she had granted the prosecution's request to allow the jury to consider the charge of manslaughter as well as second-degree murder. We all stood and and I watched the jurors, all female, 5 white, 1 Hispanic, exit in an undeniable and very definite feeling overcame me. Something I so strong I couldn't deny it. Leave. I just didn't want to be there. Somehow I knew this wasn't going to turn out well. Whether the verdict was guilty or not guilty, I just did not want to be there. It was just a feeling that I got, a voice screaming inside me. I had to leave this place, this area, these surroundings. I need to go home. Our attorneys were suggesting and recommending that we stay just in case the jury had additional any additional questions. But what questions could they have that we would need to answer? Any questions would have been directed to the state or the attorneys. So why did I need to stay? So the media would see my reaction once the verdict was read. I didn't want to put myself or my family, friends, and supporters through that publicly, and I thought it would be a grave injustice for my fallen son. I wasn't going to give the killer the satisfaction of watching me cry if things went his way. So I was very aggressive with my decision to leave. I'm leaving, I told Tracy and my family in the conference room at the courthouse. What Tracy said, we had to stay for the verdict. Tracy was still holding out faith in the jury. They were, after all, a group of mothers, and he hoped they would see Trayvon as their son as much as ours. But the cultures were too different. I had a sinking feeling that they wouldn't see things like that. After sitting through the trial, I just didn't believe they would come back with a guilty verdict because I honestly didn't think the state had proven its case beyond a reasonable doubt. No, 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 you got to stay. You got to stay here. They may have questions, the attorney told me. I'm just not getting a good feeling, and I want to go home. I told them ready to leave and get back to the safe haven of home. We had to stay here for the work, Tracy repeated. Parks and Crump said, you guys need to stay here, echoed my mom. The lawyer told me I needed to stay to address the media once the decision had been made. They sound hopeful. They had based their careers on the behalf that our justice system worked, that the bad guys with the guns pay for their crimes sooner or later in civil court on appeal, but eventually they would be held account. I had already made up my mind. I had seen the system fall short on its promise of justice for Black Americans too many times. I had done my best to remain strong throughout the trial. The endless replaying of the 911 tapes and the horrible photographs of my son's corpse sprawled on the ground. I wasn't going to allow the cameras, the press, and the public to see me break down now. I'm just uncomfortable. I said, I'm starting to get sick, which was true. My stomach hurt, and I had a headache and a terrible feeling. I turned to my family members in the room. I cannot stay here, I said. If you want to stay here, fine. I'll go get on the plane. I'll go rent a car. I'll walk home if I had to, but I'm going home. Finally, Tracy said, well, if you leave, I'm leaving too. We're all leaving, said my family. So we did. Oh, Lord. I called Daryl Parks and just said we're leaving, but we couldn't just walk out of the courthouse. The sheriff's department had to escort us out, and that wasn't easy. With the world's media and the growing crowd outside waiting the verdict, and awaiting our reactions to the verdict. That morning, we had driven our own cars to a place a safe distance away from the courthouse, from which point Daryl Parks had driven us to the courthouse as he always did. Now that were leaving, the sheriff's department came up with the plan for our exit. They drove a van up to the loading dock at the back of the courthouse, and we all climbed in and drove away. They dropped us off at our cars, and several sheriff's department squad cars escorted us to the Florida Turnpike, where we were safe to drive anonymously back home. I rode with Tracy in his truck down the same roads, highways, and turnpike that we had taken so often since Trayvon's death a year and a half before. It was a familiar ride, but on this day it was different. It was about to be over. They should have stayed. On the drive home, we talked about the trial and that we had been through. We talked about how only about 17 months before our lives were shattered by this tragedy. Trayvon was preparing to finish high school. Gerard was heading off to college. We talked about the media's constant presence in our lives. We talked about how nobody who hasn't been through it knows how it feels to have lost a child, even the jury. We didn't believe they understood why Trayvon was wearing a hoodie, that it was a fashion statement worn by all races and nationalities, and not a sign of criminality. And we didn't think they understood that our peaceful protests were not, as one of the jurors said, riots. We didn't understand why the judge had ruled against the use of the phrase racial profiling. It was a Friday evening when we turned into the driveway. I told Tracy good night and went inside, showered, and went straight to bed, praying before I turned the lights out. Praying our things, praying for Trayvon, praying for justice. Almost everyone else, the media, the attorneys, the protesters, stayed in Sanford. Back home in Miami, I didn't watch television. I had barely watched it during the trial, and I wasn't going to begin now. But people told me what was happening about the endless legal analysis and commentators speculating on the case and what the jury might think or do in the action on the streets of Sanford. Outside the courthouse during the jury deliberations, crowds still gathered. Sanford had split into two fractions, just as the country had. Trayvon supporters made up the majority, we believe, but there was a small, loud, aggressive group supporting the killer. Many of Trayvon supporters simply wanted their voices to be heard, frustrated by what they saw as an ongoing legacy of injustice. It was reported that one young woman lay in the grass outside the courthouse, a hoodie pulled over her head with a bag of Skittles and a can of iced tea lying next to her. Like Trayvon, her arms were spread wide and her legs were crossed, headphones still in her ears. Let's not lose any more children to gun violence. Justice for Trayvon read a sign beside her. There were shouting matches between our supporters and those of the killer. Protesters gathered near the Goldsboro Welcome Center and outside the courthouse. People carried signs with Trayvon's image calling for justice and chanting, we want guilty, we want guilty." Others wore black t-shirts with President Obama's words, "If I had a son, he looked like Trayvon." By next morning, Sunday, July 13th, I went over to my sister's house where family and friends gathered to wait. We weren't expecting the verdict that day. We just wanted to be together for support as we waited for the decision, which we thought might take several days. We were all sitting around chatting about TV shows and things. Day turned to night, and eventually everyone was getting ready to go home. It was after 9 p.m. when our attorneys got the call. After a little more than 16 hours of deliberation, the jury had reached a verdict. Our attorneys, Crum Parks, Rand, and Jackson entered the courtroom to listen at last to the jury's decision. This time I did watch. I huddled around television with everyone else in my sister's family room, hoping for the best but fearing the worst. All of us held our breath. Ever-present courtroom cameras brought us the event live. We could see everyone in the courtroom stand as the jury entered. The six women looked exhausted and grim. Their faces seemed upset, even though they had deliberated for such a short time. Members of the jury, have you reached a verdict? Judge Nelson asked. The jury foreperson handed the verdict from over to the deputy, who delivered it to Judge Nelson. The judge read the verdict silently. Without expression before handing it over to the clerk, who read the verdict aloud. In the Circuit Court of the 18th Judicial Circuit in Fort Seminole County, Florida, the state of Florida versus George Zimmerman. She said, verdict, we the jury find George Zimmerman not guilty, so say we all. And just like that, it was over. I'm going to come back to read this later.